All right, team. I hope you are doing great and you are working on the project that we are sharing in our MLOps playlist. You had seen how we had created our project, how we had written our Python script, thereafter executed our project in a virtual environment, and also we had written our requirements file to manage all the dependencies while execution of our project. Now it's time to test our project and we will write some test cases for our application. Okay. Now why test cases are important or why testing is required? Okay. See, when we bake something, okay, so before serving to anyone, what we do, we test it, right, to verify everything we had used to bake it is proper and it is good in test, right? Same way, when we create a software, it's very much important that we should test it before we can let it to be used by user, before we can provide it to the operation team who will deploy it at the server. Why? We don't want that our application should get crashed in any circumstances, right? For our application, we want to check so many other factors, such as how is it going to behave if someone is giving the blank value? Because there can be a situation someone wants or some hacker wants that our app should get crashed, right? So we need to check if someone is pushing a blank value, then what will happen? So in such situation, our app should behave very gracefully. It should handle such situation. We need to check and we need to verify it. What will happen if the input given is not in the same format as we had used for the training? Okay, so how my app is going to behave? This situation also, my app should behave very gracefully and it should not get crashed. So these all things we need to test and we need to verify. Okay, same thing if the return, like we are also expecting that in any situation it should not return a null value. Okay, that also we need to check. So what we do, we'll create a test file, okay, and we'll write different test cases within it. We'll write different test cases within it, right? And we will check that my application is running smoothly and is it kind of passing all these test cases or failing all these test cases. Okay, always I want all the test cases that I'm going to write, I want my application should pass it, right? So we have to verify it through our testing file, and testing file can be created with the help of a Python module which is called Pytest. So we will see this Pytest module and we'll see how can we write the test cases. About the Pytest, I already created a video, and what I do, I'll try to link it in the I button so that you can just go to that particular Pytest video and just try to see how Pytest actually works. Anyway, we are going to use it over here as well, but in the previous video, I explained Pytest right from the scratch. Anyway, let's start with the coding part. So here is my predict file. Okay, so what predict file is doing? Predict file is there to predict certain thing, right? Like for example, if I'll execute it, will just make a prediction and it will give me a value 1 or 0. Now what we do, we have to write the test case. So for writing up the test case, we'll go to our application. This is our loan app and this is our ML project. In the ML project, we'll create a new folder. Let's say the folder name is tests. And in the tests folder, I'll create a new file. The file name I can use test predictions .py. Obviously, I have to test the predicted value, like is it as we are expecting or is it different? So for that, while writing the test case in Python, we import an important module which is called Pytest module. So we are going to import it. Next, we need to use different package and modules we already created, such as config, or for data handling, I need what? Load data function from data handling file, right? Or I also need to use the predict file, predict.py, because that predict.py will predict, then only I can test. So we have to import other modules and packages. That's why we need to set some path into the system environmental variables, right? That's why we required a system and we required OS. All right. Okay. Now what we need to do, see, we need to set this thing that is ML project as a into the system.path. So for that, we'll check over here. I'll just define a variable called package root, in which I'll define the root directory. Okay. So for defining the root directory, we'll use over here os dot path, absolute path of what? Of file. So this will give me the absolute path of my file, right? So let's see package root. Okay. And I'll check whether it is working or not. Yes. So this is absolute path and this is our root directory, right? So we'll just use over here os dot path dot directory name. Okay. And we'll check the directory name over here. So this is a directory name. And then one step I have to go to the ML project. So I'll again take it and paste it over here. All right. So now I had defined our directory name that, okay, from this particular thing, I have to import config and other packages, right? So I'll just import over here from loan app import config because it is within the loan app. And we also required this thing that is called processing because I need data handling file, right? As I need data handling file because in the data handling actually we are loading the data. So that's why we need a data handling file over here. So because for the testing we required what? Data, right? So that's why we'll write over here from loan app import what? Processing. Okay. And I'll check whether it can import or not. So it is saying no module name loan app. Why it is saying? Because we had not given over here system dot path dot append. Okay. I need to do what? Package root I have to pass over here. Save it and let's check once again. So things are working properly now. Now what do we do? From loan app dot import config. So here config is a file, config.py is a file within the config folder. Okay. Config.py is a file over here if you see within the config folder. Right. So what we do? We'll use over here from loan app dot config import config because I required this particular file. Right. So what we do? We'll write over here from loan app dot config import config, right? And I'll check if it is working or not. Working good. Same way from loan app dot processing. Okay. I need to import over here in the processing. I have a data handling, right? So import data handling. Okay. I'll check it out. Let's see. So this thing is also working better. Now in the data handling, we have something that is called load data, right? So what do we do? We'll just import over here load data part. I'm doing a step by step so that you should know in case if something is not working, how can we fix it? Nice. So everything is working fine as of now. What next we need to do? We need to check the predictions value, right? So from loan app, okay, within the loan app, we have something called predict, right? So import, and within predict, we have generate prediction, right? So import predict. Okay. So here is an error that we can see. No module name config. Why is it so? Up to here, everything was smooth. But when we executed it, it shows an error. Why? Because the other things were like what we did? We set this thing as our, just focus here. We set this thing as our root package. Okay. So within this root package, whatever the package we have a package loan app. Okay. So from loan app, we can access the other package that is within the loan app. We have a processing package, we have a config package, we can easily access it. Right. Now, what are we doing? We are trying to access this thing. Okay. This is not within any package. Right. So for this guy, okay, for this particular guy, right? The root package is not ML project. For this guy, the root package is what? Loan app. Right? For this guy, root package is what? Loan app, right? So when this guy we are calling, okay, if I will execute predict.py right here, there is no problem. It's running smoothly. No, it is not showing any error. But when the same predict.py we are calling through test prediction, that means when this file execute, predict thing executed, and when predict thing executed, this line is executing, and when this is executing, that means this line is executing through this file. Okay, that means we had written over here from config import config. Okay, we wrote over here from config import config, but the thing is this config is actually, that means this particular line, okay, this line, right, is working over here. That means here, I'll comment it. So when I am writing this line of code, so predict file is executing, and when predict file is executing, it is going to trigger this line, right? But how can it work? It will not work, right? Because config is something which is present within the loan app, and my root package is ML project. So any module within the ML project, any package within the ML project, we can easily import, right? But config is not within ML project. Config is within loan app, right? So what we need to do? In the predict section, we can do what? I can just write one line of code, import system, import OS, right? I can do what? Config root. Okay, let's say over here config underscore root. Okay, this will be equals to what? Let's say the current file os dot path dot what? I can use absolute path, right? What file? I'll just check the location of this guy. So print what? Config root. Okay, and it is doing so many things. So as of now, I'll do what? I'll just kind of make this thing. I'll comment it. All right. I commented everything, and I'll say what it is returning. So predict.py. So basically I have to set this guy as a root package, or you can say config root, right? So for this I have to do what? Os dot path dot directory name. All right. And then I'll just call it. Okay. So this is directory I have to use. So I'll write over here what? System dot path dot append. Now I will just append this location over here, so that when I will call, when this thing will be called from where? From test prediction. Test prediction is calling it. Okay, like when you are executing this line, so this line is executing this line, right? So this line is getting executed not from predict.py. When you import it over here, this line is getting executed from this particular file, that is test prediction, right? That's why when it is getting executed by test prediction, in that case, this path should be there in what? In the system path. Okay, so once I execute it, let's see if everything is working or not. I'll save this thing and I comment this thing not required. I'll save this file. Okay, then I will, okay, I'll just save, fine. Okay, now let's execute it. This is just to make you understand. Okay, everything is running smoothly. This thing executed, that's why it is showing what? Model has been loaded. All right, now we can go ahead to write our script for the test process. So for the test process, the very first script that we are going to write, that means the very first test case that we are going to write is to test the return value should not be null. That means whenever we are going to predict anything, whenever we are going to give an input, the return value should not be null. This is the first test case. All right. So for that, we'll create a function def. Let's say single test single prediction not null. Okay, and here I have to give the predictions, or you can say a single prediction. All right, and here I'll write the case. Print, first of all, let's print testing if predicted result is not null. All right, and then I'll do what? I'll just write it over here. Assert single prediction is not none. Okay, and then I'll just print it over here. What I should write? Test passed. Okay, I will write the single prediction is not none. All right, so this thing will do what? Will just test that, okay, the single prediction is none or not none. Now over here, I have to pass the predicted value over here. Now question, how can he pass the predicted value over here? To pass the predicted value over here, we need to do prediction on any single data row. What do we need to do? We need to do prediction on any single data row. So for that, we'll write the logic over here, def single prediction. All right, and here we write a logic for predicting the value. So for predicting something, I have to use over here first load data set. Okay, first we are going to load data set. Now how can we load data set? That would be test data set will be equals to what? I need to call over here load data, and within the load data function, what we require, if you see over here in the data handling, we have a load data. It requires the file name, and where is file name? The file name we have defined in config. In config, it's config.test file, right? So I can just call over here config dot test file. All right, now what we do, we'll just take any single row for making the predictions. So for taking the single row, I'll do what? I'll take over here single row will be equals to what? Test data set. Okay, so we can just call over here :1. Okay, that means it will just pick up a single row, or you can say single row for making up the predictions. Now what we do, we'll write a try catch so that in case if there is any exception, that exception can be handled gracefully, right? So try what? Try to make the prediction. How it can make the prediction? For making of the prediction, we require the function called generate prediction. And where is generate prediction? It is in predict. So predict dot generate predictions. And this generate prediction requires what? My data. So I'll just pass over here single row. All right. So when I will pass it, I'll get the result. So let's say I'll store the result over here. All right. Then I'll print predicted outcome result. Okay. And thereafter, what we do, we'll just return the result. In case there is an exception, I need to handle it. So accept exception as E, and I'll just print over here what? F got exception. And then I'll just give a raise. That means it will raise an exception. Okay. So this is what we did, right? Now, when we are going to trigger this test file, so how can we make sure that this function should trigger first and thereafter this should trigger? Because here I don't have to manually, it's not like that the normal function where we have to just call it separately. Okay, we don't need to call it like this. Okay, no need to call it like this. No. Okay, because we are using Pytest module, and Pytest module will automatically call this particular function, automatically trigger this function. Any test function that we created, that will automatically get triggered. Okay, only thing we have to make sure that this thing should run first. So if any particular function that I want to execute first, as we call the Pytest file, so I have to call over here, I have to use a decorator over here called pytest.fixture. This makes sure that this function run first and the returned value can be used over here. So we created our test script, a simple test script, and we will check how is it behaving. So for that, we'll go to the location where test file is created, right? So if you see, this is a location where my test folder is there, and we have a test prediction.py, and here is my loan app in which other files and folders are there. So at this location, I will run over here command prompt. Okay. In the command prompt, if you see, these are the files we have. Here I have to just run Pytest. Nothing I have to do, I have just run Pytest. Automatically Pytest module will detect the test directory, and within the test directory, test prediction.py, and it will test all those cases. Nice. So we are getting an error. What error are we getting? Type error, generate prediction takes 0 positional argument, but 1 was given. Why is it giving me the error? So to understand it, get back to our program. So if you will see our program, we have a generate prediction over here. Where is it? Predict. So generate prediction is something which is not having any parameter, right? So generate prediction is something which is not having any argument over here defined, isn't it? So as nothing is defined, then how can it accept any parameter? And we are feeding some parameter over here, right? For predicting, see, single row. So it will not entertain any parameter, right? So we need to do what? We need to create a function over here which can accept some parameter. So for that, I'll copy and paste it. And for the time being, I will comment this thing. All right. And then here I'll do what? I'll modify this function to accept a value and make a prediction. That means accept a single row and make a prediction. So in this function, first thing that we need to do what? We need to define something called data input. Okay. That means now this function will work based on the data that we provide. Earlier it was making prediction on the complete test file. So when we do the data input, next thing we have to do what? We have to convert. So this thing will just remove from here. Okay, now we have to convert this thing into the data frame because test data was already in a data frame, right? So we have to convert this thing into the data frame. So data is equals to pd dot data frame, what? Data input. All right. So now my data will be converted into the data frame. Now we have to make the prediction on this thing. So for making the prediction, we are already using model.predict. Okay. So in the model.predict, I can feed over here data input, right? Or you can say data, not data input. So over here, I can feed what? Data, the data that we have created over here. All right. Now here we are also printing it. So we don't need to print anything. Let's try to execute this thing if it is working or not. So I just modified the generate prediction part and I commented the old generate prediction. Now let's see what happened if I run it once again. Pytest. So still we are getting the error. Why are we getting error? Because if you see the feature names, it means what? It means the feature names is not same as it was used for the training. Okay, obviously because here we are just accessing a single row. Okay, we are doing what? We are accessing a single row, and that single row we are feeding over here. We are not defining any feature names. So let's define the feature names over here. We can define columns is equals to config dot features, right? Okay, we need to make sure that config dot features is having all the feature names predefined, right? If you see, these are the features we are trying to feed. Okay, so let's check how is it performing right now. So again, I'll get back to our test prediction. Okay, there is no change required over here. We'll again run the Pytest. You can see one test passed. So now let's try to revisit everything what we all did. First, we wrote over here our test case. The test case was what? To check the return value should not be null. Return value of what? Return value of this particular function. This function is doing what? This function is basically created to make a prediction whenever we pass any single row of data. So when we pass a single row of data, our generate prediction function failed because this generate prediction was not created to accept any parameter. So we create a new function to accept the parameter and make the prediction. That when we are accepting the row of data, we are converting it to data frame, define the column name for each feature. Then we are feeding it through the model, and model had predicted the value, and that we are returning. Obviously this is not null, that's why the test case pass, and you can see what output are we getting, the test case pass. If you see, I'll show you once again. Clear? Nice. Now we'll write further test cases. Next, what we do, we'll write a test case to check if the return value is a string or not. Obviously the return value is not a string. I'll show you. When you run this thing, let's say I'll comment this part. This is your predictions, right? So let's say I commented it, okay, and I will execute this guy, okay, which is making prediction on complete test data. So let's say if I execute it, it is what the return value is 1 or 0, which is not a string, isn't it? So we will see, we'll write a test case to check that whether my return value is string or not for any single input, which will ultimately return that test failed, and then we will fix it. So let's try to write it, def test single prediction string type. Okay, so is it a string type or is it not a string type? So for that, again, single prediction will be there. All right, and here I can just write assert is instance. What is instance? Is instance what? The single prediction that we have, is it a string or not? So single prediction dot get, I'll get the outcome of that single prediction. For what? We'll get the value against this particular key, that is predictions, because we are returning the value as a dictionary. So this is your key. So dot get prediction, okay, and output will be what? Will be in a list. So I'll take what? Index 0. So is it a string or not? So this function will check that the output over here, output of this particular function, is it a string or is it not a string, right? So let's say I'll save it and then again I'll run it. I want the output to be string, right? But right now it is not. Anyway, let's check. If you see one failed, which one is failed? This thing. Output is not a string, right? So how can we make sure that output is a string? So what we do, we'll go over here in the predict section. We will modify something over here. Let's say this is a predicted value that we are getting, right? So I'll write a logic over here. A status will be equals to lambda x, and I'll say what? Return y if x double equals to 1, else return n. That means we are trying to return over here y or n, yes or no. And then in this status, I will pass this pred value, right? So status, I'll pass what? Pred. Okay. So when we pass this as pred value through the status, I'll get the output as y or n, right? So this means this thing I can directly use it over here, right? So now I'll get the output as y or n. Okay. Now again, check your test case. All right. Both the test passed over here, isn't it? So now if you see, both the test case passed, right? Now the situation over here, one more situation that we have to identify while writing a test case. Here we are testing that output is not null. We are testing that output is string, but we also need to check the first sample that we had used for the prediction. The first sample is generating 1 over here. 1 stands for, as per our logic, y. But may possible I wrote the logic incorrect over here. Okay, there is a chance. So how can you verify that my logic is correct? We'll write a test case which will check the output is y. That means whenever it is 1, the output should be y. Whenever it is 0, the output should be n. And we have to write a test case for that. Okay, so that it should not be a situation that when my model is expected to return y and it is returning n, and when it is expected to return n, it is returning y, right? That I don't want. So for that, I have to write a test case which can verify that for the first sample output is what, y. So let's write it. I can give it a function def test single predicted validate. Okay, and here I will feed what? The single prediction over here. All right. Assert the single predicted value. How can you get the single predicted value? This is my single predicted value, right? Single prediction. All right. Assert single prediction dot get. Okay. Get what? This prediction. That means this is what we have. Okay. It will return me y or n. Now, is it equals to y or not? Okay. Save this thing. So now we have 3 test cases. Now we'll check all these 3 test cases once again. All 3 test cases passed. That means my output is not null. Output is a string, as well as the first sample output is y. And it is expected to y because for the first sample, if you see, the test data is showing 1. So 1 means what? It should be y. So the next test case that we have to use is like we have to test what will happen if my input is blank. Okay, that means user is not entering any value. So is it like my application will get crashed, or will it handle it gracefully, right? So I'll write over df test empty dataset. Okay, so first let's say I'll define an empty dataset. Empty dataset means what? Actually, I'll just use over here blank value, nothing. Okay, now when I define blank value, thereafter I'll do what? I'll use over here result is equals to, I'll call generate prediction, right? Predict dot generate prediction, and in this generate prediction I'll feed it that is empty dataset. All right, and we'll check that whether it is handling the empty dataset predictions or predictions on the empty dataset properly or not, right? So thereafter I have to check over here, assert the predicted value, that is the result over here, the result that we are getting. So assert result dot get what? Get prediction, same thing, index 0. Okay, so prediction is also a blank value, so it will just validate that if you are feeding blank, so is it like generating blank or not? That means the generated output. So that is what we are going to check. If this thing happens, then we can say that test passed, right? So let's save this thing and check how is it behaving. Okay, double equals to it should be. Okay, so now let's test. You can say one test failed, okay, as it was expected. That means because of this situation, my app may crashed. Okay, now why is it saying one test failed? Because we had not given any logic to handle the empty data set. Where I should give the logic? I should give the logic in our predict function, right? Or you can say in the generate prediction function. In the predict file, in the generate prediction, we have to write a logic to handle the empty data set, right? So let's try to modify this particular function. So to do this thing, what we do, we'll just use over here try. Okay, so try to get this data. In case you have some exception, okay, exception as e, right? Print what? E. Okay, this is what we are doing. Now what you do, I'll write over here a logic if data is blank. That means if data dot empty. Okay, that means there is nothing in the data, because when we are calling it is blank, right? So if data dot empty, then do what? Then print over here. What you need to print? The input data is, or it's a blank data that you are giving. So the input data set is empty. All right. So now returning empty predictions. Okay. So let's try to put it over here. Return what? Return, in this case, it is returning the predicted value. In this case, it will return predictions, and here it should be blank. This is done. Okay, and then we have a test prediction over. Let's try to check if any modification required will do, but as of now it seems to be good. See, it is showing one test failed, right? Now, why is it showing one test failed over here? The problem is, like, if you see over here, we are taking index 0. So index 0 is fine for these guys because these guys are generating y or n in a square bracket. So we take index 0 to take y. When we are taking the blank value, so for the blank value, we wrote a logic to generate a prediction which is like this. Okay, to generate a prediction which is just a square bracket. If I'll take a square bracket, then I should not use index 0, otherwise it will generate completely blank value and it will not be equals to list, empty list. So I just need to take over here predicted value. Now again let's check, because we are returning over here a square bracket. So here also I am comparing a square bracket, so I should not take over here index 0, right? Now again check it. All right, so all tests passed now. Okay, that's looking cool. Now next what we can do? So next what case we need to check? Let's think. So now we tested just one row. For example, I want to test some multiple rows, some random multiple rows, right? That also we want to check. So how is it behaving? Like suppose if some row number 10, row number 50, row number 70 will be given. So randomly we'll pass any random rows and we'll check the performance on those data rows, right? So for that we'll write over here @ Pytest dot mark, okay, dot parameterize what? Test input. Okay, the test input that we have, whatever the test input we are giving, so that test input it will take, and thereafter it will take from here some random values, like say row number, I can define over here 0, that already we are taking. So let's say something else, let's say row number 10. Okay, let's say row number 100, and let's say row number 55. Okay, let's say I just take some random rows over here. So for the testing, we write a function over here, test multiple rows. Okay. So while testing the multiple rows, I need to give over here test input. So what is my test input? This is just the test underscore input. I'll write it over here. Right. So when the test input will be given, this test function will test the multiple. First it will test for row number 10, then it will test for row number 55, then it will test for row number 100. First we need to take the data set. So test data set, that will be equals to what? Same thing, load test file. So this will take the data set. Once we have a data set over here, thereafter I will just take any data row. So data row will be equals to what? Test data set. Okay. So generally last time we take what? Row number 0. Okay. Now we have to take random rows, isn't it? To test. So if I want row number 10, so what I do? I'll just take over here test input. Okay. That will represent row number 10 colon test input plus 1. Okay. So a single value we are taking. Initial value plus 1. That will give you the single value, right? Thereafter we'll get the result over here. That would be equals to what? Your prediction. So what is a prediction? Predict dot generate predictions, right? Okay. Predict dot generate prediction, and I will feed over here row. Okay. So it will just make the predictions on the given data set, right? Now I have to check that, okay, this thing is not null. So assert result is not null. Then we have to also check it is a string value. So assert is instance. Okay. Thereafter, the result, just like the same way we had used earlier to check this thing, is instant. I'll just copy this thing and I'll paste it over here. And instead of single prediction dot this one, I'll just use whatever result. All right. So it will check that the return value is string. Kind of a checking the string. If you see over here, the predicted value we are checking through predictions because the return value is in a dictionary and prediction is a key for that. So here the same thing I have to do. Result dot get prediction. Result dot get the predictions and then index 0 then string. All right. Now we can't check that it is y or n because it can be randomly. It is a randomly picked value, so it can be anything. So we are just checking two things over here for multiple rows, that it should not be null and it should be string. So let's test this thing. I will just trigger Pytest. Okay, so all the 7 tests passed. Now what next test condition we can use? We can use a test condition to check if the input is not as per the expected format. Okay, suppose user is entering 5 inputs, like I required suppose 9 features for prediction. User is giving me 5 features. Okay, or some different kinds of input, which is just it is giving me numeric, non-numeric, everything they are giving me for making the prediction. Then how my model will behave? Okay, so till now, if someone is giving me a blank value to predict, my model will not crash, my app will not crash, and my app is giving the output as it is expected. But what will happen if someone is giving a data that is not in expected format? So that's what we have to test now. So for that, we'll write a case over here, df test unexpected input, unexpected data format. Okay, let's say, and then I'll just define the data over here, invalid inputs. So invalid inputs will be equals to what? I'll just define an invalid input, or you can say an invalid data format over here. Let's say I'll just define randomly anything, invalid string. All right, I just define invalid string. This can be one thing. Next, I can define, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Next, I'll define some dictionary, let's say key value. All right. So obviously, this is just random defined data file that I'm giving for the prediction. Now, what I will do for this particular input value, okay, I want to make the prediction. So for invalid, or you can say for invalid input, in invalid inputs, one by one, we'll just put it to the predictions, right? I'll say try to generate the prediction. So how it can generate the prediction? Predict dot generate prediction, right? So I'll say try to generate the prediction on what? On this invalid input. Okay. And then except, obviously exception will be there. So except exception as E, print E. Let's try to execute it and check how is it behaving. All right. So now this thing is also passed, right? That means in case if there is an invalid input, then also my program will, my application will not crash. Okay. Why is it working properly? The reason, here we are converting in data frame. So in case it is not in this particular data frame, that means it is not in this particular structure, then this exception is handling that particular situation. And as exception is handling this situation, that in case if someone is entering an invalid input, my application will not crash. Okay, my application will not get crashed because of invalid input, right? And it will work smoothly, gracefully. So these are the test cases that we had used over here, and we had seen my how to trigger the test file, and all my test cases are getting passed over here, that means there's a very less chance for my application to get crashed. So what are the test cases we wrote over here? Let's see. First, we had written a test case to check the output should not be null. Second, output should be string. Third, it should be y for the first row. Fourth, in case if there is a empty value passed, then my application should not crash. It should work gracefully and it should work smoothly. Fifth, we had seen that for different fifth, sixth, seventh over here for different rows we checked, it is working good. And last, for invalid input, also it is working properly. That means my application will not crash. In case if you want to test some other cases, do comment down so that I will write a logic for that and I will also test on that particular situation. So just complete it. Next, we have to just create the distribution file for this particular project so that it can be installed in any system. It can be installed in your system. It can be installed over the server, or it can be distributed to anyone who wants to use this project for loan approval, or it can be given to the bank who can use it for loan approval. So thank you everyone for watching this video. Stay tuned, keep learning and stay safe. We'll meet soon.